My name is John Kenyon. I'm the Executive Director of the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature Organization. I'd like to welcome you to today's panel discussion as part of the Iowa City Book Festival. The festival this year stretches over the course of 2 weeks. We got a little out of control when we were planning, but I think that's to your benefit. We have about 40 events over these 2 weeks, and we're toward the beginning of that schedule, so there's a lot to come. When you walked in, you either picked one of these up or walked past the table with some programs. You can grab one of those on your way out. If you didn't, it folds out into a nice poster that shows you all of the things that we have going on, and we are right here. So look at all those things to come. So there's a lot that I hope you'll join us for. So today we're very pleased to welcome you to this panel discussion to discuss Jim Throgmorton's book, Co-Crafting the Just City. And I'm just going to introduce our moderator for this session, and then he's going to take it from here. I know we are going to have a really robust discussion. We will have the opportunity for you to ask questions. I'll have a microphone that I'll carry around at a certain point. I did want to let everyone know that our friend Adam from Prairie Lights is at the back of the room and would love to sell you a copy of Jim's book. And I know that Jim would be happy to sign that and chat with you afterward. So thanks again for coming. Today's session will be moderated by David McMahon, who is a professor of history and the Civic Engagement Committee chair at Kirkwood Community College on the Iowa City campus. He's an accomplished public historian whose work focuses on the Midwest, and he's a former city councilor in Lone Tree, and he's served on Iowa City's Historic Preservation Commission, and he's a longtime resident of Iowa City. So a lot of expertise to be brought to bear on this discussion. So I'd like to welcome David up, and he will introduce the rest of our panel. So thank you.
Thank you, John. First, let's start with how many of you are Iowa City residents? Raise your hand. How's that look? How many of you are not? Okay, a couple. How many of you are students at the present time? Graduate or undergraduate? Okay, it gives us, Jim, gives us a little sense of who we're talking to. By the way, how many of you have read some or all of Jim Throgmorton's book? Okay. This is truly a city of literature. I'm happy to be here during this busy weekend in Iowa City. I was just talking to John a minute ago. There's nothing to do in Iowa City this weekend, is there? As the moderator, I intend to be mostly peripheral to the proceedings. I'm here to set the stage for a community conversation between panelists and the audience and attempt to guide the flow of conversation. The goal of this session is to have a thoughtful, respectful conversation about some of the issues raised in Jim's book. In a real sense, what we're doing is practicing democracy, but we are limited in time. For those of you who are worried that this is going to go as long as a city council meeting under Jim, I want to assure you that it will not. John says we have about an hour, but we can fudge that a little bit and go over if needed, and there's nothing prohibiting us from going to a restaurant or a watering hole if we want to continue the conversation. As for the rules, everybody be nice. Jim will go first. I'll introduce Jim, and then the panelists, I'd like them to introduce themselves and to briefly share their perspectives, or what Mary Mascher calls takeaways, and we'll go from there. At some point, we'll invite you, the audience, to ask some questions. We'd prefer questions rather than statements, of course. Also, because I'm a teacher, I brought a survey. I figure if I have a handout, I have a lesson. There are some questions that might guide our conversation, but it's also an occasion to perhaps collect some responses from you and perhaps invite you to future conversations as well. So use that survey as you will. Before I introduce Jim and the panel, I want to say a few things about the book and about Jim. Reading this book reminded me how serious and important local politics really is. More serious and more important than most people know. It also reminded me that Jim is a supremely thoughtful and decent guy. I thank you for your service. Reading the book and talking with Jim about it brought to mind some familiar quotations by more famous politicians, sentiments I think Jim would agree with. All the ills of democracy can be cured by more democracy, said Al Smith. An honorable profession calls forth the chance for responsibility and the opportunity for achievement. Against these measures, politics is truly an exciting adventure, proclaimed Robert Kennedy. All politics is local, preached Tip O'Neill. And history will be kind to me, for I intend to write it, quipped Winston Churchill. Well, Jim has written a kind of history, the kind written by a retired professor of urban planner turned mayor. He certainly has documented the recent past thoroughly and told a very interesting story about it. Speaking as a historian, I see the book as a gift to the community for what it details and for what it offers for further discussion. Jim understands that the meaning of this Iowa City story goes beyond his book. It lies in what the various audiences bring to the story. So let me turn it over to Jim, and then we'll hear from the other panelists, and we'll see where the discussion leads. I began with a question that he's anxious to answer. Hey, Jim, what's it like to be mayor?
Familiar question. Thanks so much, Dave, for the kind introduction, and thanks to John Kenyon for enabling this event to occur, and thanks especially to the three terrific panelists for bringing their experience and insights to bear on the conversation we're going to have. It's going to be great fun, I think, and hopefully very enlightening. So, like Dave said, hey, Jim, what's it like being the mayor? I heard that question over and over again during the 4-year period I was mayor in Iowa City. It revealed, for me at least, a simple truth. Many, if not most, people here know very little about local politics. If we want democratic governance to thrive here, this must change. Many people I talked with had no idea how the mayor of Iowa City is elected or what the mayor did. They typically did not know what the spatial boundaries of the city are, how Iowa City government is structured, what its powers are, and how those powers are constrained and shaped by Iowa state government, the federal government, and many other actors. Instead, many people I spoke with often seem to think the mayor runs the show and presume that Iowa City government has the power to solve problems like, the difficulty of finding affordable housing, or rectifying racial injustice, or reducing the city's greenhouse gas emissions. With a simple snap of the mayor's fingers, or Iowa City government's fingers, the all-powerful mayor and city government can make things happen. Wrong. Answering that simple question, what's it like to be the mayor, was one of the key reasons I wrote this book. There are other reasons. You read the book, you'll see that. There are like at least 4 other audiences in mind. More specifically, I wanted to help readers learn what council members and mayors do, what it feels like to occupy those positions. Consequently, the book reports how, using democratic processes of governance, the residents and elected leaders of Iowa City tried from 2012 through the end of my last term in 2019 to co-craft their city's future while being immersed in a complex and contentious flow of action. I also wanted readers to learn that local elected officials are not powerless automatons. They have discretion about how to use the powers they do have. Consequently, I wanted to document what happened when council allies and I tried during my 2 terms as mayor of Iowa City from 2016 through 2019 to lead our relatively small city toward becoming a more inclusive, just, and sustainable place. That is, toward becoming a more just city. In chapters 2 through 4 of the book, I report what residents, elected leaders, and professional staff of Iowa City did during this 8-year period. Narrated in my voice as a participant in these activities, these chapters provide a ringside seat for witnessing what I thought, felt, and did as these events were unfolding. I wanted the reader to feel like the reader was kind of right on my shoulder, observing, listening, engaged in dialogue with me. The 5th chapter focuses on what I thought, felt, and did on 2 ordinary days in March of 2019. The closing chapter offers some basic conclusions pertaining to the book's 4 general objective and 4 specific aims. I'm not going to go into most of that. The story orients around 3 key conflicts, only the first of which I anticipated at the beginning of my council term in 2012. Those conflicts were, first, interlocal economic competition between Iowa City and its neighboring cities, especially Coralville, to attract capital investment and highly educated workers. This conflict provided the foundation for most of the city council's and the city manager's key actions from 2012 through 2015. The second conflict was between neoliberal, I call them boomtown advocates, I also refer to them as members of the growth machine, which is a term that comes out of the urban planning literature I deal with, and a loose coalition, AKA the Core Four, which sought to turn Iowa City toward becoming a more inclusive, just, and sustainable place. And the third was the extremely sharp conflict between the political preferences of most Iowa City residents and the ethno-nationalist, conservative Christian, free market fundamentalist regimes that dominated state and federal government. 2 key turning points marked the emergence of the second and third conflicts. The surprise election of the Core Four in November of 2015, followed 1 year later by the even more surprising election of Donald Trump as President of the United States. So I'm happy to elaborate on any aspect of the book, but for now, I think it's best to do just what Dave suggested and turn things over to our panelists to hear what they have to say. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Ruthina Malone. I am a current member of the Iowa City Community School District School Board. I'm just starting my 2nd term. So, we're supposed to just talk about our initial takeaways.
Yeah, sure.
So my initial takeaway in reading Jim's book is how very similar city government and school board is actually in certain perspectives, but also how different it can be, since obviously city council governs a much larger swath of the community compared to Iowa City School District. But the understanding of what both bodies can and can't do, and the importance of educating those that we serve so they can understand what our powers are and how we can effectively use those powers to make things better for our community, and especially when it relates to some of our most precious gifts, which are our children.
And I'm State Representative Mary Mascher, House District 86. I have been in the legislature for the last 28 years, and I'm not running this year, so I'm not on the ballot and not out door knocking this afternoon as a result. I'm also a teacher. I taught elementary school and was also an elementary counselor for 33 years in the Iowa City Community School District. So education is near and dear to my heart. And as an educator, I did my takeaways, David, and then I kind of broke them into parts. And so I'm going to share some of that with Jim. We met before this whole decision to have this as part of a book festival came about, and Jim and I had this conversation, and he said, there's one condition, you have to read the book. And I said, oh, okay, I can do that. And I really enjoyed it because it gives you a lot of the background and the things that we didn't read in the paper. Oftentimes, there's too much to put in the paper. Right?
Yeah, all right. It's the generous rate.
Yeah, that was
all
a
right,
good
thank you.
save. Okay, trying here. Anyway, I found it very interesting to see the politics behind the scenes. And that's what I think is a really good takeaway. If you get a chance and haven't read it yet, I think you'll discover that as well. So thanks, Jim, for giving us a lot of that background. But these are my takeaways really quickly, the 8 that I came up with, and I'll be quick. Issues are very complex. They are not cut and dry, and politics is messy. The school board, city council, county government, state government, it is not just really easy, well, to yes or no vote. No, there's a lot of other factors that come into play, and it does get messy, and it's oftentimes difficult to reach consensus. Decisions are best when transparency is available to the public. You need to know what's going on, and that was one of the things I saw throughout the book. Jim, you constantly were concerned about, does the public know? Does the public have a venue for expressing their views? And how do we make sure that that happens? So that's a real credit to you that you were conscientious about that the entire time. Public input is critical and it's good. You need that criticism to be able to make good decisions. And that input is absolutely essential. Compromise is challenging. And to find that compromise and to be able to move forward is very difficult, not only with the public, but within the council itself and within the city managers, those individuals who are actually implementing those decisions. An engaged electorate is far better than an apathetic electorate, and we couldn't have more engaged people in Iowa City. It's one of the things I'm most proud of and why I loved representing this community. It's certainly that we have a lot of diversity and we have people who care deeply about issues that most people maybe wouldn't spend the time that we do, whether it's deer population or whether it's historic preservation or whether it is racial issues and how do we create more equity in this community. So those are things that, again, I just see a real passion in this community for people doing it and doing it right. Diversity is a gift, not something to fear, and we have a very diverse community. And to me, that's one of our strengths, and we should always celebrate that. It's always about the people. We should always remember that and trying to do what is best for the majority. We don't always do that, but we also need to listen to minority views and know that sometimes the majority is not going to support those, and you've got to buck that trend sometimes. We're not an island. This one is just very apparent. What happens at the county level, at the school district level, at the state level, at the national and global level, all of that affects us. And Jim, you bring that up constantly throughout the book, is how those issues impacted us locally. And so I think that's another one that we need to keep in mind, that we're not an island, and we do have, obviously we're affected by all of those activities, those events, whether it's a war in the Ukraine or whether it's George Floyd and that whole issue of police and what do we do to make this a more conducive environment for all people to live in. The last thing I just had was everyone's views an issue, they view an issue through their own lens. Each of us in this room have our life experiences to draw on, and then our educational background, and then obviously we're in a community that is very, very conscientious about what is going on in city government, school district government, county government, and so we have people who do have those lenses. We need to hear from them. They're an important part of the decision-making process. And then just the last thing, sometimes we don't get credit for the things that we do, even if it's just to stop something. At the state level, we stopped tenure, where they were going to eliminate tenure at the university. We knew that that would have a very negative impact upon this community and the University of Iowa as a whole. Obviously, Iowa State and UNI had that same issue in terms of the concerns. We were able to educate other legislators who had proposed that legislation and to get them to back off of that. The same thing occurred with solar. They had really wanted to eliminate solar energy in terms of being able to put that on your own home and your businesses. We were able to back that up and worked really hard to do that. Censorship. this last time around with trying to censor what was being taught in our schools and what was allowed in our libraries. One of these is the best in the state, right? Well, maybe the nation. Selling the Jackson Pollock. You remember that whole controversy? I was there. We talked and talked and talked and had our directors from all over the country say, why would you sell your seed corn? That's what you're doing. This was an investment. How could you possibly think that that would be a good idea? I'm going to stop there. I just wanted to share with you some of the takeaways that I got from the book. And again, thanks, Jim, for writing it. It's pretty enlightening, and I think those of you who haven't read it yet will find it very enjoyable.
Good afternoon. My name is Zachary Oren-Smith. I live in Iowa City. I want to thank the UNESCO City of Literature, particularly John Kenyon, for letting me bother these 3 elected officials. I'm the only non-elected, nor running, nor will probably could ever get enough votes to get elected. So it's really cool to get to talk to these folks, kind of in a different context. So I appreciate that. Thank you to Jim. For writing about the Chauncey and kind of re-triggering me on those long meetings and how that all, what an exciting way to kind of revisit that topic. So I work for Iowa Public Radio now. I cover Eastern Iowa for the station. Very recent. Before that, the reason I'm here is I covered the last couple years of Jim Throgmorton's time as mayor. I was a city reporter, and if you are looking to fall in love with a city, I cannot imagine a better way to get to know it and to fall in love with it. Being a city reporter was one of the it's the job I kind of always wanted, and to get to do it for this city in particular is really special. So thank you guys for coming. I wanted to say, Jim, one of the kind of points that I think that you were making that I think is really key here, a question that comes up for me all the time as I'm thinking about it is the ways that, I spent a lot of time trying to get people to care about local government, right? I worked for a Gannett paper, and let me tell you, I could tell how many minutes people spent on a city council story. I could tell you how many, I could tell you, with great specificity, gauge the interest in some of my stories, right? And my editor made sure I knew how interested folks were on that. And one of the things that was very clear was just kind of like the difference between a statewide story versus a local story, the kind of appeal that would have to folks, the kind of interest you could get on those stories. And I think it's really important to think about not just kind of why aren't folks interested in city government? Why aren't folks interested in school board and state legislature? I think it's really important to think about how are those institutions interesting to people? How are those institutions structured, those meetings crafted in a way that makes them understandable? I'm not an elected official. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a graduate degree. I think I was lucky to pass get my diploma, right? I'm a member of the laity, right? I do not have a background that makes prepares me for city government. All I had was just many hours on the phone with folks like these 3, and many hours spent in city council meetings. And I think one of the things that is very apparent if you've kind of stuck your head in one of those meetings is how incomprehensible at times these meetings can be. And when you were an angry party, I remember I exited the first meeting of my first city council meeting under the impression that the most popular issue in Iowa City was deer castration, because at the time, the deer plan, there was a constituency that had filled up the public comment talking about how deer castration was kind of like the more ideal policy matter for the city to take. These meetings can be very difficult to understand and to get a sense of kind of what it means to govern, what it means to be, what is the consensus of the town. And I think it's really important that electeds and members of the public, as we're trying to understand these institutions, think about the ways that these institutions allow themselves to be understood to us, right? Because I think that's we often think of these things as they're complicated, so you need to spend more time with them. But they're complicated because we created them that way. These are structures; they can be changed too. And anytime we talk about like the need for interest in local government, it's also how do we make local government understandable? How do we make it accessible to schmucks like me? Thank you.
Thanks to the panelists, and I'm sure the panelists have already thought of things they want to say. I want to continue talking about, and the audience is already has questions in their heads. But let's keep for just a moment with one of the major issues that's developed here, and that is about what it takes for Mary and Ruthina and Jim to do the work well, and what more we need to know about the process of government. And Zach, you can comment a little bit more. You've done a good job of talking about what it looks like from reporting. But what does it take to do this work? And again, continue just a little bit about what the people should know about what it is that you do and why it matters.
Who's starting, Zach?
I'll start with you.
I used to tell my fellow council members that the most important thing for us to do is get out of City Hall and go where the people are, talk to them, and listen to what they have to say. So that's a large part of what's involved. If you just go to the meeting prepared by reading all the material that the staff gives you, and then are sort of ready to make some kind of decision based on that information, you're going to have your attention focused by the city staff based on the structure and processes that exist at that point in time within city government. You're not going to have any sense of how that issue, whatever it is going to influence the larger mix of people throughout the city. So you have to somehow get out of City Hall and go talk to people. And listening is really absolutely crucial, absolutely central to that. And it's maybe surprising to discover how hard it is to listen well. You know, you've got to be really attentive. You've got to hear what they're saying and then process it enough so maybe you can restate their question so that you know you're answering the question that they're asking. And then if you disagree with them, you can engage in some dialogue with them. And then, okay, well, that's the thing. You're not making a decision at that moment in time, but at least you've taken what they have in mind into account. And then later on, you got to do something similar at the city council level. So you got 7 people. You got city attorney, city manager, who's the other person? City clerk, and then people out in the audience. And some people in the audience are saying things to you, so you got to somehow process that material too. Okay, I'm going to stop there, but listening is crucial.
And I want to move on to the other panelists here for a second, but Jim, maybe you speak just for a few more seconds on this issue about you've said you've certainly praised the city staff and everyone that you worked with, and yet you felt that some other councilors perhaps were too often deferred. Can you speak to that issue about that's sort of what it takes in effect to do the job well, is to make sure that you're doing the job?
Yeah, in the book I refer to the city staff members as skilled voices in the flow. That means they have expertise. They bring it to bear on whatever the topic is, and they feed you information that is consistent with whatever their expertise is and what they think should be done. But that does not mean you should do what they say, because you haven't had an opportunity to talk to anybody else. So the debate about Idlewild and whether there should be a flood wall around Idlewild, which appears in chapter 2 right at the start, that's an example of that. Now, did we make a good decision? I don't know. That's up for debate. People can disagree about that or agree. But other people were involved in the process of making a decision because city council members went out and talked to various people. So that's what I'd say.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Yes,
Yeah.
you did. And so for the rest of the panel, we'll pick up again with the idea of what does it take to do the job of public service? And again, what more should people know about this process? And again, Zach, you can give us the back, behind the scenes sort of look at it.
So again, I think this is where city council and school board is very similar. Jim mentioned that it's important to get out there and talk to people and to listen. As a school board member, it's incredibly important to get out there and talk to the people that we serve, notably our principals and our teachers. So one of the things that I have made an effort to do during my tenure is to actually go into our schools, spend time. And school board, just a reminder, is the only elected position that we get zero compensation for. So oftentimes for us to go into these schools, all of us work. So that requires us to take vacation, use our time. But if it's important and you want to do this job well that people entrusted you to do, you have to get out there, make time to talk to people. I, for one, I don't think I've ever imagined the large number of people that have my personal cell phone number that currently do, because over the last 5 years, I am more open than what I ever thought I would be with my number. So I give it to parents that want to talk about why a second bus was taken away from their kiddos and they're struggling getting to school. I give it to teachers that may not feel comfortable using my school board email address and they just want to share something that they saw, a concern, or talk through why we voted on a policy the way that we did. I give it to folks that work out at our district headquarters, just so they know I'm accessible. I want to hear what your thoughts are on what the 7 of us are doing, because oftentimes, and the other school board member in the audience will co-sign on this, I often say that the 7 of us at that table, we're not the educational specialists. By that, we're not the folks that run schools. We were elected because we might have had some great ideas on how we do that, but we don't know the ins and outs of what it takes to get there. So we have to talk to the people that it directly impacts. And oftentimes that can muddy the waters to get to that decision-making process, but you have an abundance of information that helps you funnel through to whether or not what the administration is presenting to you is the right plan, or you can push back and ask some of those difficult questions. So for me, and being a school board member, if you're not willing to get out there and talk to people, and people who may not necessarily be your fan, and actually attentively listen to them, and not just listen in order to respond, but to listen to get to the heart of what's their real issue, or what is it that they're looking for me to do, so you can have that dialogue and address that.
So I'm going to start with know who you are. I think that's the first premise for anybody going into politics. Des Moines is not a good place to find yourself. If you don't know who you are before you get elected and go there, it is really difficult, and it becomes very apparent to others that you don't have that moral compass that guides you. And I just think it's really critical to know who you are before you get elected and choose to run for office. Then the next is know your community. I can't tell you how many legislators have come to me and said, I wish I could vote the way you do, but I don't live where you live. And I think how awful it must feel to vote against your own self-conscience because you don't believe you'll get reelected, or that's more important than actually doing the right thing. And so those things always sadden me when I see legislators that feel that way and say things, I wish I lived in Iowa City, I wish I could vote that way, I just can't do that and still be representing this area. And those kinds of things always don't sit well with me, because I just think that has to be hard to go home at night and feel that way. I wouldn't be able to serve and do the job I do if I felt that way. The last thing, I just have good mentors. I'm sure, I know Jim did, Ruthina did, I'm sure Zach you have too, in terms of people that you can go to, that you trust, and that you know will be honest with you. You know, give you that self-reflection that sometimes you don't always have that perspective. And it's like, okay, Mary, back off on that one, or let them have it. This is a good one and you need to be out there and we want you to speak out. Minette Doderer is the one who said to me at one time, Mary, know the issue, know it well, and then take a stand. And she said, even if people disagree with you, they will respect you for taking a stand on that issue. At least they know where you are. Don't waffle. Don't, say one thing and then do another. Those are the kinds of things that cause distrust among the public, because they see that and they think you know, you didn't tell me that, and yet this is the way you voted. So I look at some of those mentors and know that I wouldn't be where I was today if it hadn't been for those people that have helped me along the way, and I think they're really critical in the process.
I love that point on mentors. That's huge. I'm not an elected official, and I'm not going to pretend that I know what it takes to be an elected official. I will say that right now, any party chair, any party's chair will tell you that the bench is extremely underpopulated. So if you are someone who is interested in running for office, in running campaigns, interested in knocking doors, interested in participating in the process, y'all, like this is. I cannot imagine a better county or region to be living in, right? I love the three folks that we have. We have kind of the educator mindset of a politician on stage. We are very well represented from the professorial to the teacher. These are folks that I have found that really love to explain process. They really love to get into why things are the way they are. They like history. They like context. They like for you to come away being like, oh, well, I kind of understand this a little bit better. That's huge. But that's far from the only way to. That's far from the only mindset. There are people that are great talkers. Former city councilor Rockne Cole comes to mind as being just someone who you just put a mic in front of the guy's face and he just has a lot to say, right? Not everyone is that way, right? There are many folks that are there are introverts that will somehow find their way elected, and sometimes they're extremely effective, right? It's you don't think about it, right? But they can wield power and they can do things effectively. So I don't know. I think a lot of times we think of these things as really you either have this set of characteristics or you do not, and therefore you either do participate in politics or you don't. It's there for you. And I hope more folks take advantage of that.
Okay, this is a great short course on politics. There's one issue that I do want to bring up. There's so many issues to talk about, but at the moment, can we just talk for a minute about how we might solicit the views of people who don't often participate in the decision-making process? Because that's something that's come up. The folks that are serving us in the public are very anxious. As Ruthina said, she's more accessible via cell phone than she ever imagined herself to be. We spoke about listening and so forth. But is it worth it to make the effort to be more inclusive and to bring other voices to the table? How might we create the space for more authentic and impactful democratic participation?
I'll toss out a couple ideas. I think there's more in the book, but the ones that are coming to my mind are two. So one is exemplified by something I did right at the start of my mayoral term, and that is ride the bus. So I arranged with, one of the local TV reporters to go with me because they were interested in this. And I first stepped onto the bus, said to the bus driver, hey, my name's Jim Throgmorton. I'm the mayor of Iowa City. Would you mind if I came in with a reporter and then had an opportunity to talk with people on the bus? So he said, oh, yeah, sure, great. So we got on, and the first person on my right, as I was walking down the aisle, said, what? You're the mayor? That person was shocked. And I ended up having a conversation with him, having a conversation with somebody else farther back and somebody else farther back. And they said whatever it was that was on their minds. And I did that, probably 6 times in my first year and 2 or 3 more times in the second year, something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers. And then realized I could not keep doing it, largely because of the election of President Trump, because suddenly I found myself doing all sorts of other things I never imagined I'd have to do. The other thing I'm thinking about is at a very different scale, Dave, and near the end of my book, I say that we need to construct a justice constituency, or I think I use the term coalition in the book, but constituency is really what I had in mind. And by that I mean that there are all these different kinds of people. Some are interested in racial justice, some are interested in solar panels, some are interested in neighborhood liveliness. Some are interested in a viable downtown, and so on, a whole bunch of stuff. I think of that as a problem, think of that as exemplifying the fact that the city is a problem in organized complexity. It's just phenomenally complex. Things are interconnected big time. But with regard to the kind of diverse array of people I was just referring to, most of them focus on what is of greatest interest to them. Like my North Side neighbors, very focused on trying to make sure the North Side neighborhood stays healthy and all that. I'm on board with that, but it's not the only thing I think about. And then their racial justice, huge thing, obviously, huge thing. And so I don't need to say any more about that right at the moment. And then, suddenly blanking out, affordable housing. The Coalition for Affordable Housing, the Affordable Housing Coalition, very focused on that topic. Great, they're doing terrific work. But what about the overlapping connections between that and some other aspect of the city? Riverside Theater, which I'm on the board of directors now, right now. How does it and the Englert and film scene and the other major cultural institutions of the city connect with the larger ensemble of activities? So I think we need a justice coalition. So that's a very different scale, but if you could activate that, and I can imagine sort of a continuing forum wherein people have an opportunity to learn things that might be of interest to them, but also help them understand the bigger picture, that would be pretty helpful.
Okay, and to the rest of the panel, we're thinking here again, Jim has raised a number of issues about affordable housing, the Justice Coalition, racial justice in this community. Those things we'll maybe get back to with special focus. But in general, how might we solicit other voices and, is it worth the effort?
So I'm going to start with the end of that. Is it worth the effort? Absolutely. Whenever you're serving a large number of people, it's always worth the effort to hear varying voices, to get different people at the table. And one of the ways that I have gone about doing that is being accessible. I jokingly raised my hand when Zach talked about being an introvert, because some of my friends in the room will know that I am an introvert, and I'm surprised it actually came today. I thought of excuses I could use because, just joking,
We're
Jim,
glad
I
you're
wouldn't
here.
do that. Because it is difficult, and I never saw myself being in public service, but because I raised my hand and because the community believed in me, it's my job to make sure that I get other people at the table feeling as, knowing, not feeling, but knowing that their voice matters. It's been countless numbers of parents that I've ran into over the last 5 years that I'm always amazed when they say, oh, nobody cares what I have to say. It's like, you have a kid in our district or you're paying property taxes, I care. And you should want to share your thoughts, even though it may be different than what you're hearing from those seated at the table. It could be because that's what I'm hearing from everybody else I'm talking to. So I want those with different views or different perspectives on things to reach out, because I won't know what else is out there unless I hear from those varying voices. And another great way that I'm able to work to hear from different voices are through the connections that I've been able to make in this town since serving on the board. I'm always surprised that people even know who I am, but I get emails even through my job accounts, like, I know this probably isn't where I'm supposed to send a school board issue, but I'm hoping you can talk to this family. And so it's important that people know that their elected officials aren't there just to hear themselves talk, but also to hear your concerns and try and get an understanding and bring those voices to the table and make it so that you feel welcome, that you can share maybe an unpopular view. We get those sometimes at the microphone. So it's just important, I think, making yourself accessible and stopping to hear from people that may not even think like you, look like you, or have the same experience as you, because that's the only way that we can hear from people of all swaths of life in this community.
And I would just say, go to them. Oftentimes, we think, well, they'll come to the board meeting, or they'll come to the city council meeting. They don't. Working folks don't have that time or that luxury, especially if they have children at home. And so it's really critical for people to go to them. So that's why I belong to the Southside Neighborhood Association and go to those meetings, and I learn a lot every time I go about what's happening in that community and what's available to people and what the needs are. And so I think it's really critical to be able to find those places where you can go and be a part of the conversation or just listen. Because I think in listening, you can find out more than anything. My son will tell you that when I first was elected, I would say, well, I'm going to run to the store and get some bread. And he'd say, no, you're not. No, I'll do that. Because he knew that it would be 3 hours later and, past dinner time. And so he would often say, don't do it, I'll do it. We just don't have the time, Mom. So there's things like that. And I'm sure that's true for Jim and Ruthina. I don't know if Zach's getting that yet. But again, people know who we are, and they are not afraid to come up to us and talk to us, and making yourself available. We have so many community festivals in this area and in Johnson County. We can go to anything, almost any weekend, including a book festival, but we have so much available, and when you go to those, people seek you out, and they have questions and they have things they want to know about. And so making yourself available is really critical in all of this. Coming to Des Moines is not a viable option for a lot of people, right? And so don't expect that. The League of Women Voters does a great job with our forums, and they provide that as an avenue for people to get questions answered and to find out what's going on legislatively. Those are all good. They've got candidates forums coming up, so you can learn more about the candidates running for office. Those are really valuable, and those are the kinds of things, again, we just need to make more accessible in terms of doing it online and making sure that people have that avenue as well if they can't get away from home. So those are the things that I would mention in terms of places to be able to have people seek you out.
You asked if I get any comment.
Yeah,
Do people know how to find me on the internet? My God, my email box can testify that it's not all. Yeah, people when I write something that folks don't like, man, boy, do I hear about it. I may spend 5 minutes on it. They're gonna spend 5 hours writing back about it. I'm gonna go into Jim's book does a good job of going in two directions, kind of utilitarian directions about details, about specificity, and about kind of more like higher-minded design questions, right? So I'm gonna kind of give you two. One, I am always humbled by how much impact a single email to a city councilor can have, right? I think there's like a sense that people don't read things. I think there's a sense that people they take 1 billion calls a day, and so they don't care kind of like what it is that is said to them. I think I am always humbled by how individual action can impact a individual politician, right? And so I think like utilitarian-wise, right, if you're looking for impact on a particular issue, my God, what an incredible power to just bother someone. It is, as a reporter, it's the only thing I've got. If you're looking for real political power, the ability to bother is immense. More design-wise, I think there's a way that we talk about the solicitation of public comment as a kind of, we were talking earlier about this expression, the will of the people, right? Anytime an elected person says the will of the people, you should be, that your hackle should go up. You should be suspect, right? Because they're trying to sell you something if they're invoking the will of the people, because there's no, in a representative democracy of the size, of the scale, of this aperture, like there's just no, there's no way to like really gauge what it is that 100% of our population is, right, believes or wants out of an issue. There's no way to like kind of quantify, well, 60% want this, so we're gonna go with the majority share, right? We like the idea that that's how government works, but that's not how this works, right? Instead, you get our charismatic megafauna. You guys all know it's the folks that show up to every meeting, the folks that are in their emails, that are in their Twitter DMs, that have their cell phone numbers and will call reliably. These voices, I think, often outweigh. And that's because I think they have been they are either the like kind of just the very special character that has decided that they are going to be that voice. And I think there are some folks that just, they have that chip on their shoulders. I think there are other people that have been incentivized, right? That they have made there's been some outcome that they have been able to reach through this process. And so they have been incentivized to do something, right? To do this action in this way. Structures incentivize and disincentivize us, right? They allow for and disallow for certain kinds of engagement, right? If you look at this book conveniently stops in 2019, when I think some of the most interesting civil, the interesting time to be in government or studying government in the last. I've only been here since 2017, so what do I know? But let me tell you, 2019 onwards has been a fascinating time to be thinking about civic engagement in this city, because we saw a tremendous rise, a tremendous engagement of a group of folks, young folks, folks from many different backgrounds who have never been involved in city government, suddenly wash up like this wave onto the city council, expecting quite a bit, right? And we have since seen a petering out. And what does that mean? What does that look like, right? I think because there has not been a means of kind of experiencing change, of like kind of realizing change, because the city government is not built to kind of work with the kind of like sudden onrush of public voicing. I think we have seen a large group of people feel disincentivized from participating in the future, right? And I think there's a big failure, right? It is that, right, that we had this, sorry. This is why you never put a mic in my face. But I think, again, just thinking about like the ways that we are incentivizing certain kinds of engagement and disincentivizing others, I think this is a critical question in terms of how we are running the future of the city, how we're co-crafting the future of the city, is how we are incentivizing that kind of interaction and the extent to which we can create a sense of having changed something. I think that's key.
Okay, there's a lot of great stuff. And one of the reasons I handed out the survey was that I think there's a need for further deliberation on all these issues, and particularly creating a framework where the public can really weigh in, and you know, that it's not a one-off, and people can begin to make that change. Before moving to really assessing the extent to which, how far along have we gotten in creating the just city, I do want to return to one issue, since we have people involved in education on the panel, and that is that in local politics, some people don't always understand the fact that Iowa City and the Iowa City Community School District have different missions and geographic boundaries, but the interconnection between the school system and the city are very important, and it reveals a lot of issues about our community. And so I wish you might reflect a little bit about those interconnections and some of the issues that it's raised, and perhaps what work we have yet to do.
So Ruthina and I are going to go outside and talk about this for a little bit. I'll say just a couple quick things. One of the strongest commonalities between the school district and Iowa City government is that both are structured as basically administrator council kinds of organizations, so that the school, the president and others in the school board exert some kind of oversight of what the administrator is doing, whereas in our case, we're supposed to give direction to the city manager. So, but your constituency is very different from Iowa City's. So our constituency is the 76,000 people or whatever within the city limits of Iowa City, and yours includes most of, well, all of Corvo, I think, and half at least of North Liberty, and Hills, and other parts of the unincorporated parts of the county. So the people who vote you into office are very different in a sense, from the people who vote us into office.
Right. And I mean, and the reasons why they vote for certain ones of us are very different, I think, and sometimes very similar, because a good example is one of the things Jim highlighted on in the book was the Core Four and their desire to, they had very similar desires to create this just city that focused on affordable housing, more diverse populations. And around 2017, when I ran for school board, that I don't know if you or any of the other Core Four knew how much of an impact that other campaigns after that looked at the success of the core four and looked at that to say, how can we replicate that? Because we know that we're a group of like-minded folks that want to see a more diverse school district. We want to see a more just school district. We want to look at our socioeconomic levels in our schools and make a change where it's not just targeting those on the bottom rung, but more so that all of us have to do our parts to balance our schools. And so that's an interesting point that I hope that you guys saw and walked away knowing that you changed the landscape of how campaigns ran and what we thought we could do, that if we could get our message out there to share with people that this is how we want to change things. And I think that's very similar in city council, that we looked at affordable housing issues, but in a different way, because we can't go out there and build houses or zone places, but we can look at our, I just went blank. We can look at our populations that's zoned to schools. We can look at the type of teachers we put in our buildings to make sure our students are being uplifted. So that's quite a bit of ways that we're the same and different.
Yeah, yeah.
The only thing I would add to that is, we have so many successes here in this community at both the city level and at the school district level. And I think sometimes we forget to celebrate those and identify them. Jim does a really good job on page 199, and it's under the heading, What Happened When We Tried to Lead Iowa City Toward Becoming a More Just City. And it's all of those accomplishments. And I don't think sometimes we take the time to sit back and say, wow, we really did accomplish some really good things, and we're moving in a direction that really fits our strategic plan. The school district has done that as well, but I look at that and think we as citizens should be celebrating with them because we accomplished that together. And I think sometimes we forget about that and don't take the time to celebrate those accomplishments.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mary. Zach, I know you, I talked with you before the panel. I think you have something to say.
So Ruthina, you brought up the core four and like how seeing the rise of the core four, how that kind of changed a slate. So these are nonpartisan offices, right? And so like the popular thing to do, the traditional thing to do is you run not with a party. You don't put Zachary Oren-Smith, a registered Green Party, running for this office, right? The traditional thing is to be very militant, very orthodox about your nonpartisanness, right? You're not connected to a party, and importantly, traditionally not connected with slates. We've seen, if you see in the school board, particularly slates of Republicans running in the school board elections right now in the state. You've seen these stories, maybe. Nodding your head, some of us have. So this is kind of like a non-traditional way of doing things, right? You don't tend to see that kind of office. And when I arrived to town, people still had their hackles up about the core four, right? About how dare they, run as a unit, right? That it's like what you're damaging the decorum, right? Of like these nonpartisan elections, right? Jim, one of the things that every time I hear the core four invoked. A thing that he was always very careful with me. Every time I would say, like, so Jim, I noticed that the core four voted this way in this particular thing. Jim Throgmorton would always tell me, the mayor would always tell me that, first of all, Zachary, we're not a slate, we are not a group.
Is this an invitation?
I think this is like a super, Jim has explained, has answered this question for me a million times, but I invite you again. Like, why do you draw a distinction between, why do you leave the kind of slate making, that kind of like what is ultimately like a political strategy at the in the election, but didn't bring that into city council? Because I always thought that was a weird decision. I actually disagree with it maybe as like a strategist maybe, right? Like I would think that might offer some power for future votes.
Jim, before you answer, let me just say, I asked John to extend my time here, of course. He said we could fudge, and so I was anticipating that.
Sorry.
For the audience that I'm sure you're buzzing with questions, I'm going to let Jim respond, and then we'll kick it out and see what's on your mind, okay? Jim.
If you want to change policies and processes and structures, you need in Iowa City's government at least 4, the number 4, because there are 7 members on the city council. So if you're not interested in changing things in any kind of substantive way, but you just want to serve serve the people by being a competent city council member, well, you can get on there and be responding to all the information that the city staff gives you, and then the complaints that come your way from people, and then 4 years later, you probably won't run for a re-election. But you will not have changed anything fundamentally. So having been a council member in the mid-1990s, and then having served the first 4 years of my term from 2012 to 2015, I knew that if we wanted to change things in any kind of important way, we had to get to the number 4. I did not, you read the book, I did not think we had any chance of getting to 4.
Right, you said that.
I was just astonished when I got down to the sanctuary and discovered that, in fact, the results were in, and all 4 people got elected.
You can see the surprise. The Press Citizen has a photo gallery. You can see the the starstruckness on these people's faces. It's worth checking
But I knew
out.
the wind was at our back. That's a fascinating thing. Walking down there, I knew the chances were really good that at least 3 people would get elected.
In the
I thought
book,
with-
you used the phrase "holy," and I won't.
Yeah, you did use that.
Yeah,
word.
yeah.
did
Oh, with
say
at least
that.
3 people getting elected, then we could get more done,
Yeah.
But with 4, we could
power.
change things. So
Yeah.
then the challenge was, okay, well, you got to figure out what you want to change fundamentally. And a flaw in our whole process was that we did not have much of an opportunity to be really clear about sort of what our agenda should be after being elected, because we never really had that kind of conversation. We just knew there was a lot of simpatico kinds of feelings.
Sure.
Yeah, so that'd be my basic answer.
That's a good answer.
So many issues have been raised that need further discussion, and others need discussion as well. But in the time that we have remaining, I'd like to kick it out to the audience and have John do his best Phil Donahue and run around the audience. Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask the panel? And please say your name as well.
So, as elected officials, have you,
It's on.
Your name, Linda?
oh, I'm sorry, my name's Linda Schreiber. As an elected official, have you ever changed your mind or changed a vote? And how have you articulated that decision with your constituency?
Great
I
question.
definitely have, and if you read the start of the chapter, I think it's chapter 4, focusing on me as mayor, you'll see that very early in my term, I made a certain vote and then realized that I had really screwed up and that I was trying to be a little too clever politically. And I had to retract that too clever of a vote. And I decided I was going to explain my blunder and retraction in public. And I remember getting emails from people saying, "Oh, no, Jim, never make excuses, never admit mistakes." Well, I thought, I blundered. Move on. But make sure people know that I blundered, and I'm moving on.
So, yes, I have, but the one thing that I do and what I wholeheartedly believe in and what I say from the board table and to people one-on-one is that transparency is important. So I may walk into the boardroom with our action items listed, sort of knowing sort of where I'm headed, but I go in there with an open mind. Because, like I said, there could be things that I didn't think about or points that I didn't even fathom that other board members or sometimes community members come up and share before a vote. So even when I have changed my vote, people don't typically know because I believe in transparency of doing that work at the table, and I don't run around telling people that, oh, I'm going to vote this way, because I want to have as much of an open mind as I possibly can. Not that I don't go in thinking I know how I'm going to vote, but I listen to how things play out. And oftentimes, if you've ever watched one of our school board meetings, especially when it's an issue issue related to a hot topic, we will talk through our process before we do our vote and explain why we are going to vote a certain way. And I've heard from friends, I've heard from non-friends on why my vote could have been differently. And I'm willing to hear their thoughts, but I'm also willing to explain why I still stand by that vote.
And I would just say, yes, Linda, I think we're all human and we've made votes that we wish we hadn't. And I think the most important thing is to admit it, it's like Jim said, and move on. And not be afraid to say that and to tell people why you would have voted differently. I try really hard, as the educator again, to do my homework and to make sure I know the issue well and know why I'm voting the way I am. But again, we're all human and we all make mistakes.
I always know how I feel about everything I ever do. I've never changed my mind. Just as a follow-up for you guys, one of the things that I'm always struck by, so there's like two lines of thinking about public meetings, right? Either like they are places where people are deliberating, like they are thinking and coming to understand, processing, trying to understand the things. There's also like this other way that we think about, like, well, the decision is most of the work has been done, most of the thinking has been done by the time we get here. I have my notes, I've read through my packet, I know kind of what, Jim, I'm thinking of a conversation with you, right? You have your like kind of ream of notes on a particular item. I'm curious from y'all, one of the things, and we, Councilwoman Taylor, we've had this discussion, Jim, we've had this discussion, I think with the two of y'all, I'm always like, what is your vote, right? Going into this, I kind of want to know what your vote is. Why? Because I want to make sure that I'm able to communicate to folks kind of where we're standing here, like so that the public knows, like, issue A is going to go this way, or issue B is going to go, or issue A is going to go the other way, right? One of the challenges that I always find, right, is that, like, I think we consider these meetings in two directions, right? We both think of them as deliberative spaces, and we think of them as processed spaces, right? So like things like public comment don't always have like a ton of impact on our issue, right? Like we've already experienced so much public comment, we've already kind of done our process, and we already kind of know what the decision is going to be. But we also don't grace me with my answer on like how y'all are going to vote. Do you know what I mean? And I'm always kind of struck by like how y'all think about like kind of like what is fairness in having this kind of like Schrodinger's cat of a decision, right? That it's like both, I have made my decision, but I haven't. Do you know what I mean? Does that question make any sense to y'all?
Because the reporting is your job, and so you want to get to.
Yeah, right. Well,
you want to get to that, right?
Well, yeah. So like, why not give me my like kind of mock vote? Like, what's lost there? I'm kind of curious.
You want a mock vote? Well, actually, what I find myself thinking, Zachary, is that the deliberative process in Iowa City government, at least to the extent that the council members are directly involved in it, takes place in the work sessions, not in a formal meeting.
Yep.
Though sometimes there's deliberation. If you see you got a 3-3 vote and somebody, you don't know how the fourth person's going to go, you got to have some deliberation and back and forth, and then eventually there's a vote, and some kind of decision is made. But otherwise, there's a lot of interaction at the work session level, and I can tell you that one of the first things we did when I became mayor was require that our work session be televised, because nobody had a clue what was going on in those work sessions, and yet that's where a lot of the action was. I don't know if people watch the work sessions. You'd have a better handle on that than I would, but
I could name a few people that do.
Some do. I think so.
Do we have another question, by the way? If we have time.
Here, and then I'll come to you. Eric.
oh, another
Oh, you
question.
don't have one, okay. I'll be over to you.
Hello, I'm Galen Woolbetter. My question is, we have 3 different elected or former elected officials from 3 different bodies, all of whom I feel really have worked hard, did their best, cared about the public interest. I'm wondering how much difference it would make if we had higher salaries for there's no salaries, I know, for the school board. The salaries, the state legislator, Mary Mascher, in my mind, deserves all kinds of money. She never, just from being so dedicated, and Jim the same way. Would having bigger salaries help? Because it's hard to get people that are as dedicated and knowledgeable and willing to spend the time as you three. That's my question.
Can I spin off of that?
Yeah.
Galen, thanks for the question. I have an answer prepared, sort of. Near the end of my book, I come up with some suggestions about things that I believe should change about Iowa city government. So one has to do with the mayor. I think the mayor, the salary, to increase our ability to govern ourselves better, we would need to make these changes. And I also think a considerable public discussion, thought, refinement, and all that should take place before any of these things get acted on. But with regard to the mayor, I think we need to ensure that local elections matter. And to have local elections that matter, the city charter should be amended to increase the authority of the mayor, to have the mayor be elected to a full-time position directly by the people, to extend the mayor's term to 4 years with term limits, and to increase the mayor's salary substantially from its current roughly $15,000 a year. I mean, it's laughable when you see, I mean, y'all are not being paid anything. I mean, I was astonished when I discovered that. But I think our city council members are paid $11,000 or $12,000 a year. Yeah, so I think those kinds of things that I just mentioned having to do with the mayor need to take place. Having the mayor directly elected by the people would first enable voters to choose between competing visions for the city. Second, would reveal the depth of public support for that vision. And third, would enhance Iowa City's influence relative to other governmental entities in the county and in the state. I think those are just absolutely crucial. As it is now, it doesn't matter to anybody in this state or in the county who the mayor is. Doesn't matter. They all know that it's really the city manager and the city staff that pretty much guide things, and then 7 people on the city council collectively make a decision. But the mayor comes and goes. So I think the mayor should come and go, but for longer terms and in the conditions that I just described.
Would any of the other panelists like to speak to this issue before we have, like, one more question before we formally close?
You know, being my mother's child, my initial reaction is no. Because I was raised from a woman who was a single mom to 13 kids. And she still found time to volunteer in our schools. She was the president of my local school board growing up. So that's where I got my first sort of taste of, if you're in a community and you want to make change, you go out there not expecting anything in return and you give of yourself. But in reality, if we want to have diverse voices at the table, school board is not for the faint of heart. If you want to do this job well, you do have to dedicate quite a bit of time outside of your job. It's like having a part-time job. And not everybody from different socioeconomic backgrounds can dedicate that amount of time. So if you want people from different walks of life, I think we need to pay them for their time and effort to allow them to have a seat at the table. Because right now, we're not getting that. For whatever reason, we can't get folks that's just barely making it to want to give of themselves 15, 20 hours, and I get nothing but hate mail for payment. No, thank you. I'm going to pass on that. So I wish there was something that we could change to allow payment for school board members, because I think we could get a really great crop of people with different visions at the table.
And I'll just be quick. Galen, yes, we need to increase the salaries, but I want you to think about this, and everybody in this room should be concerned about it as well. I asked Kevin Kenny the other day how much he thought he was going to spend or raise on this election that he's running for Senate. His answer was $400,000 for a Senate seat in Iowa for a $25,000 job. Something's wrong. And so campaign finance reform is something we should all be talking about, right? I mean, it is absolutely insane. And then he said his opponent will probably spend more. That could be $1 million race. Think about that. And so it makes no sense. Most everybody who's in the legislature has another job. They're either attorneys or they're teachers or they're lawyers or they're folks that are, in other business owners. And so they are doing something else in addition. We're a part-time legislature, not like Illinois and a lot of other states where they're full-time, have full-time staff, have an actual office in their districts. We aren't like that. And so Iowa has been kind of reluctant to go that route. But at the same time, you would get more diversity and more people willing to run if we had a higher salary. The other issue is civility. I look at what Jim and Ruthina and some of us in the House and some of the county officials have had to deal with in terms of the attacks. In Jim's book, you'll hear him say, I reported some things to the police. So there was a tracking of the attacks that were made on me and others on the council. That's a sad statement. And that didn't used to be in terms of when gun owners, and they say things like, we know where you live and we know where your family works. What is that? I mean, that's the kind of thing that worries me more about getting people, good people to run for office when those kinds of threats are out there. And we've got to learn how to agree to disagree and do it in a manner that we treat each other fairly and with some civility. And we've lost some of that. I've listened to some of those school board meetings. I've listened to the city council meetings and seen personal attacks on people, which I think is just totally uncalled for. So that's something we as a society need to do something more about, and again, support our elected officials who are in those positions.
A quick point, just to springboard off what you were saying, Ruthina. You look into a budget and you see someone's priorities. You see what someone cares about. You see kind of their values embedded in a document. The county board of supervisors, who have, is it a 3/4 time position that makes like, what is it, $84,000? Is that right? Sorry, it's been a while since I looked at that budget. This is the board that regulates land use. School boards regulate like our future, right? You look into these budgets and you see people's values, right? That's it. That's all.
Great point. And if we could have one more question from the audience, and we'll formally close, but we'll continue, keep the conversation going. And I know those books are going like hotcakes back there, so we'll get Jim back there to sign. Any other questions?
Hello, my name is Bijou Malia. I don't have a question because I see nobody raise their hand. I just have a comment. I just want to appreciate you guys for being here. I'm a community leader, so being here, and I'm an immigrant, from the Congo 24 years ago. When I came here, there was not a lot of immigrants and refugees, and now there's a big amount of immigrants and refugees that are afraid to come forward. And every point that you guys made here about going into the community to get to know these people, to get to know their needs, their wants, I really do appreciate it. And I hope this session is televised, and it'll be a debate from other people, from our public elected, to see what you guys are doing. I also want to thank Mayor Jim for your work. I believe you guys should be compensated for your work that you actually do and you have done. And I believe the people will understand your role more if you approach them. When they see you guys on TV and the anger that they have against you guys, they attack because they don't know exactly who you are. And the points that you made about having that personal relationship and having that experience with the people is what makes it better.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for practicing democracy. As you know, I put out a survey there if you'd like to fill any part of that out or contact us. I hope we can have more deliberations. There's much more to talk about. I hope I can have Jim come to Kirkwood and have a special deliberation on the future of Iowa City for one thing. So let's keep the dialogue going. Thank you very much for attending.